Hey, everybody, it's Natalie Bencivenga, and welcome to another edition of Facts Over Fear. I talk a lot about what is going on with mass deportation here in the United States. I've talked about issues happening all around the country, but today I want to talk about what's going on right here in my backyard in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was actually supposed to have our latest guest, Quinn Glabicki from Public Source. Hey, Quinn, nice to see you.
Hey there.
It's good to see you. I was supposed to have you on last week, but because the news cycle is moving at the speed of light, it seems these days, you actually had an update on the day we were supposed to do this conversation. So I would love for you to share with everyone, what are the updates you've learned around what is going on with ICE in the communities around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then we'll broaden it to talk about the implications of what that means nationally.
Yeah, so well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's good to be here. And you know, Pittsburgh as it is right now with regard to ICE activity, it's not Chicago, it's not Los Angeles, but nonetheless, it is happening. It is a bit less visible though, as are a
Mhm.
number of issues in Pittsburgh. Um, But the story that we were working on at the beginning of the month, we've been continuing to cover this since the beginning of the year, since the second Trump administration really kicked off their push toward mass deportations. But what we were looking at locally is agreements between local police forces and immigration and customs enforcement. Now, those can happen kind of informally, but they can also be formalized, and that comes under something called a 287G agreement, which there are different models, but for the most part, the ones around here fall under a task force model, which essentially deputizes local police officers to carry out some of the functions of immigration enforcement, things like questioning people about their immigration status, and things like that.
So, Quinn,
Um,
just to interrupt you, just to make sure I understand. So, normally that doesn't fall under a police's jurisdiction to start asking people specifically about their immigration status. So, that is something new and additional that if you became part of ICE being deputized in that way as a local officer, that would now be something you would be expected to do.
Correct. I mean,
Okay.
each department has their own internal policies
Hmm.
on that front, but no, there is no kind of wide-ranging policy that says the
Hmm.
local police departments should be questioning people about their immigration status.
Hmm.
Um, so we had, ICE puts out a list of um, departments across the country that have signed these agreements, and three of them locally signed agreements in November.
Hmm.
And initially, we were going to do a story that just kind of informed the public about where these police departments are, what this agreement means, that sort of thing. But when I started making phone calls, we found that senior officials in all three of these municipalities did not really know that it was going on.
Wow.
These police forces are in Munhall, Springdale, and Stowe Township. So one along kind of each of Pittsburgh's three rivers. Um, and I also talked to some folks at the ACLU who kind of uh, posed some legal questions about what it means with regard to a municipality entering into agreement with federal law enforcement without the blessing or even the knowledge of their governing board, so either the council or the board of commissioners.
Were they surprised when you contacted the people at the ACLU that this was happening? Were they sort of like, "Oh, that's unusual," or is this becoming more commonplace?
So these are happening kind of all over. Earlier this year, the ACLU actually sued the sheriff in Bucks County,
Hmm.
out in kind of eastern Pennsylvania. Um, that was a situation where the commissioners of Bucks County, there was a majority of them who would not have approved such an agreement with ICE. And so, in some cases, my understanding from talking with some of these lawyers at the ACLU is that, it might be a bit of a moot point. Like if the council is in favor of this, um, it's not something where they might bring litigation, but that was a situation where they did bring litigation because they knew that the council was, or excuse me, the commissioners were opposed to that agreement. I should note that
Oh, I think we lost sound. And you were about to say something important. There you are.
can you hear me? Yeah,
What
sorry.
were you about to note? Yes.
Um, anyway, that lawsuit had been dismissed. It's currently undergoing appeal, but nonetheless, on this side of the state, these three municipalities entered in, and I spent all week, early December, trying to get in touch with the police chiefs and talking to commissioners, mayors, that sort of thing. And I got a call later in the week. I think this was on a Thursday, that morning, and I had reached out to the mayor of Munhall and the police chief there. The police chief called me back. He said, we confirmed it, but when I talked to the mayor, after that, he said he had no idea. Then
Hmm.
I got a call from the police chief again later that afternoon, and he told me that they had just that afternoon decided to withdraw themselves from the program. Um,
So do you think that, see, I find all of this very concerning, right? Because normally, at least how it used to work, our government tried to work in a transparent way where the left hand would know what the right hand is doing. And I would think because our police forces are taxpayer funded, that the public would have a right to know if our tax dollars were going to now support ICE to the point that at least there would be some kind of council meeting about it, or at the very least, like you suggested, that the top officials in those communities, municipalities, and would know what's going on. So why was there this breakdown in communication when you started making these calls? Where you were thinking this is going to be a pretty straightforward story? I'll gather some quotes and put the piece together. Were you like, oh my gosh, this opens up a whole other area that we hadn't really considered yet?
yeah, I was very surprised, to be honest
Hmm.
with you. My understanding is that, and even some of the solicitors at these local municipalities told me that, if we were to enter into an agreement, that was something that would have to be brought before council or commissioners in a public vote. That the ACLU says as much. But it really does open up this kind of question of, who is signing these agreements in the first place, and who has the authority actually to enter into an agreement, because
Hmm.
it's not just kind of the optics or the kind of logistical hurdles that might accompany such an agreement, and what ensues from it, as far as operations and that sort of thing. But it's also a question of liability.
Hmm.
These working with ICE, detaining people based on their immigration status, opens up a whole realm of potential liability
Yeah.
for that municipality and for the taxpayers.
Yeah, and I would think, especially in light of what we've just seen with the whole situation with CBS, and them showcasing what was going on with some of where these detainees are being taken. The stakes are really high here. It's not even now just this concern, which is a fair concern about being put in a detention center here in the United States, but there are real implications here that people could be shipped out of our country without due process or any kind of formal um, you know, uh, legal representation being brought forward. So, when we're looking at this from the larger picture, what were some of the reasons you were given as to why a municipality or a borough would or would not enter an agreement with ICE?
I did speak to some of the chiefs. I
Hmm.
spoke to the chief in Munhall. The quote that he gave me was that, he's trying to clean up his town. He thinks
Yeah.
there is a lot of criminal, undocumented people in Munhall, Pennsylvania. I don't know,
Do they
what.
have statistics for that or any kind of evidence to back that claim?
No, I have not seen any sort of evidence to back that claim.
Hmm.
But that's kind of echoing the larger narrative around Trump's deportation
Sure.
push at this time. Um, when I talked to the mayor, he said that he didn't sign it,
Hmm.
and then they backed out of it. So it
Hmm.
can't be something that is so tightly held by the officials in that municipality that they're not willing to just back out of it when we call and ask questions.
Interesting. When you're looking at this from a community perspective, what were some of the comments you were receiving? Did you get a chance to talk with people from, Munhall, Bellevue, spaces that said yay or nay to these things? And what are you hearing from community members themselves?
Well, it's interesting. I think that Pittsburgh is generally, I would say, a pretty liberal city, as
Hmm.
are most cities around the United States. And Pittsburgh, as a city, has kind of said, Mayor Merritt Gainey, at the beginning of the year, said that Pittsburgh police will not cooperate. But at the same time, when you look at Allegheny County as a whole, it's a very fragmented county. There's a lot of
Yeah.
municipalities, a lot of different police departments,
Mhm.
and they each have their own, latitude to implement these types of policies. When you look at, there are other policy, excuse me, there are other townships and municipalities that have gone a whole other direction.
Mhm.
Swissvale and Bellevue
Mhm.
notably have introduced resolutions from their council to say we are not going to do this type of cooperation, and that's been codified, as I mentioned, by the council. Um, and so you kind of see the pendulum swinging both ways, even within Allegheny County. And it's really interesting when you kind of map where these are happening. Allegheny County is still kind of the place where there's not, the sheriff doesn't have an agreement. Pittsburgh police doesn't have an agreement. But when you look at broader Western Pennsylvania, Beaver County has an agreement. To the north, Westmoreland County sheriffs have an agreement. To the east and to the south, Washington County also have an agreement. And so, it's really, I think it's starting to creep into the county at the municipal level, and there are questions about how that's playing out.
If you're just joining me, I'm Natalie Bencivenga, and I'm here with Quinn Glabicki of Public Source. We're talking about ICE enforcement that's happening all around Western Pennsylvania. You may hear a lot about it in the big cities like Los Angeles or Boston or New York, but it's happening all over the country, and it's important to understand our region and regions like Western Pennsylvania are being impacted. Quinn, recently there was a video circulating around. It was a rough arrest that adds to this ICE controversy with an apparent ICE arrest in Mount Washington recently. These horrific actions are being seen now, it seems, all the time, both here at home and all over the country. When you, as a reporter, are thinking about how you're going to talk about these issues, how are you handling this as both an individual and as a journalist? Because I'm looking at this not just from a journalistic perspective, from but a humanistic one as well. And I think it's really easy to become desensitized to seeing this much violence in our faces all day. So, how do you approach this topic so that people remember their sense of humanness?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of ways, right? We
Mhm.
just had a lengthy conversation about the policy side of things
Mhm.
and accountability at the local level, and really just kind of my job as a journalist is to ask questions. I can't,
Mhm.
um, you know, the hope is always that those that will have impact,
Mhm.
that those questions will be answered or lead us to some kind of impactful reporting. But I spent the better part of the summer as well, following. Um, I'm a photographer by trade, and I was following the
A
work
very
of.
good one.
Thank you. I was following the work of a rapid response group, and so I found myself at a number of raids at restaurants, and there was a particular incident up in Ambridge, and those. Take the one in Ambridge, for example. We were just talking about these 287G agreements. There is no 287G agreement in Ambridge, but
Mhm.
the police were very involved in this ICE operation there that
Mhm.
led to, I believe, 12 people getting detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And so, for as much as we just spoke about the 287 and the questions that exist locally about that, it is not a situation where a police force can't cooperate
Right.
even without one of those. It's really up to the discretion of that local force. And to bring it back to my duty here as a journalist, it's important to kind of go in there and and ask questions, and also to be on the ground to document that. And so that's kind of what I spent my summer doing. And to come back to your question about the human side of this, I think that I always believe that images have a lasting impact,
Hmm.
much more so than any paragraph I could write. And so when it comes to kind of presenting what we're seeing on the ground, certainly there's a lot of logistical hurdles to being in the right place at the right time. But we were able to compile kind of, I think, an impactful sequence of images that really just chronicled how this is playing out across our region. And it's
Hmm.
it's something that hasn't really been getting a ton of coverage locally. Um, and I think part of that is, relatively speaking, Pittsburgh has been quiet when you compare it to somewhere like Chicago or New York or to a bigger city. But this is happening, every day. My sources, across the city, I get phone calls regularly saying my neighbor was detained, or this happened here. And it's really challenging to. I can't be in place to cover each of those. And right now, we're really trying to zoom out a little bit and look at the structures that are in place that are um, either enabling this,
Hmm.
or what accountability structures exist that we can question.
No, and as an independent journalist myself, I really appreciate my relationship with all of you at Public Source, because I too am getting inundated with people saying, "Can you cover my story? Can you cover my story?" around either being detained themselves or a family member, and it's virtually impossible. As we're seeing local media continue to shrink. So I just want to applaud all of you at Public Source for the very good work that you are doing in the documentation, the observation, and the important questions that you are asking, and your willingness to collaborate with people like myself who aren't necessarily in the traditional legacy media spaces anymore, but are still trying to get the word out. Going back to your point about Pittsburgh's been relatively quiet because of Mayor Gainey's perspective on policing and ICE. Have you talked to the incoming mayor, Corey O'Connor, mayor-elect, um, ahead of his inauguration about his stance on ICE, or is that still in the works, or is that something that you're not planning on doing?
Um, so I mean, Gainey did say that we're not going to cooperate, but by no means does that mean that ICE is not active in the
Right.
city of Pittsburgh. We've seen a number of arrests, detentions at both the municipal courthouse and the Court of Common
Mm,
Pleas downtown, as well as the one that you mentioned just last week in Mount Washington. And so just because the local police force says we're not
mhm,
going to collaborate, does not mean that ICE is not going to pursue their objectives here in the city of Pittsburgh. So it will certainly be interesting to see what the incoming O'Connor administration, how their posturing will be
mm,
with regard to ICE. I don't expect them to do anything much differently. I don't expect the city of Pittsburgh to sign a 287G
mm,
agreement. I think that would be something that would be quite politically unpopular.
mhm,
Um, but at the same time, there's been reporting that says that ICE was looking for greater office space here in the city of Pittsburgh, and there are indications that countrywide, we are going to see an increase in ICE detentions. I mean, they've certainly been telegraphing that all year, and I think even if you look at the data, I'm just pulling it up here, but
mhm,
basically. Um, there was a spike in the number of detentions here in Pittsburgh between June and September, call it.
mhm,
And that's kind of tapered off a little bit, but not by much. That
mhm.
data is incomplete for October. I expect that to be kind of stable at that number. But again, it is quite less, or quite fewer numbers than most other cities. But part of that's a population thing.
I appreciate that. I'd like to wrap this up talking a little bit about the people that it's impacting, right? Which is mainly immigrants. From your reporting, how did immigrant residents describe the fear and uncertainty that these agreements are creating in their own lives or their families' lives, especially around things like calling the police or accessing services, right? Because more and more people I'm reading are afraid to go to the hospital. They're afraid to go to work. They're afraid to go to their court hearings if they need to for their immigration status to remain legal. What are you hearing from people?
I think, that's certainly the concern,
Hmm.
especially when you think about, at the local level, right?
Hmm.
People who might feel less comfortable calling their local police or even their fire department because,
Yeah.
oftentimes the police respond with, any type of emergency. There will often be police there. So I think that's a big concern. I also think that, we've heard that there are a lot more presence at courthouses, not just downtown, but
Hmm.
also municipal courthouses across the county. Those have been targets for ICE. Um, so I think that that's a really important question. It's hard to kind of sum up um, what immigrant communities are feeling with regard to those agreements. I think that certainly, the officials that I've talked to have expressed concern that their immigrant constituents would be less likely to call the police or to participate in kind of their civic responsibilities. Um, but again, just because you live in the city of Pittsburgh does not mean that you are not going to interact with ICE.
Right.
They have their own objectives and their own latitude to carry out their operations in the city. And so certainly we are looking at these agreements, but it doesn't stop there. We're continuing to report on a whole host of things with regard to ICE.
And that is so appreciated by all of us. Final question, and thank you so much for spending part of your afternoon with me. Zooming out, now we did talk broadly about who's helping or supporting ICE's initiatives and who's resisting them. But when we're looking at the reversal of what you had said that they were going to enter into this agreement and then they decided not to in the case of Munhall. What does this reversal signal, if anything, in your mind, about growing resistance to ICE partnerships at the local level, even in the small towns?
So, well, we mentioned that there was also a follow up to that story.
Hmm.
It was Munhall who backed out after we asked question, and then Stowe Township as well.
Hmm.
Both of those municipalities canceled their agreement. But in our reporting, just about a week after that, um, we noticed that Stowe reappeared on the list of participating agencies, and so it's not clear that these municipalities um, will remain off that list, even if they do in the short term. I think that there is a lot of fluidity there as far as how local police departments are interacting with ICE.
Hmm.
And as I mentioned, we've seen significant activity from police departments that have no formal agreement with ICE in the first place. And so um, I do think that ICE is making a concerted effort to recruit police departments to sign on to this. All of the chiefs that I spoke to said that they were approached by ICE to
Wow.
sign these, um, and yet it's really unclear what that will mean. It gives them uh, these these deputized responsibilities. But we're also talking about really small municipalities.
Yeah.
Looking at a place like Munhall, for example. I'm not sure what the immigrant population there, but
Hmm.
uh, it certainly borders Homestead, which has a growing immigrant community, and same thing with Stowe Township, which borders up by kind of McKees Rocks in that area. And so I think that you're going to see people who have concerns about where they drive through, certainly concerns about getting pulled over in those types of municipalities when the expectation is um, that they will be questioned about their immigration status by local police.
When the reason I was looking to my computer when you were speaking was because you were sort of triggering some thoughts for me around immigration and the importance of it in the state of Pennsylvania. And I just wanted to end on this thought, and I appreciate all of the things that you shared with us today. Immigrants are crucial for Pennsylvania's growth. Okay, they are driving population increases, economic vitality, and workforce stability offsetting native-born population declines, especially in key sectors like healthcare, tech, agriculture, with recent data showing significant boosts in tax revenue, entrepreneurship, and filling labor gaps across the state. It's important that we recognize the positive impacts that immigrants have made in Pennsylvania as we acknowledge what is happening with this immigration crisis. Quinn Glabicki from Public Source, I appreciate you so much for taking time today to chat with me. If people want to learn more about your work, or if they want to follow along, or if they have a tip for you, where can they go?
Yeah, you can follow all our work at publicsource.org. I can be reached at quinn@publicsource.org. And on Instagram, that's my primary social media at Quinn Glabicki. But
Thank you.
thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. I hope you'll come back. I'm sure you'll have lots of updates for us as the new year moves us forward. And until then, everyone, please take care of yourselves and each other. Have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.
Thank you.